Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Welcome to Pro Bono Week. Thank you very much for attending. I'm Amanda First. I'm Assistant Dean and Chief of Staff here at the Law School. Welcome to this event, Justice for All, Minnesota's Civil Legal Aid and Pro Bono Landscape. So thanks to Minnesota Law's Corporate Institute, the MSBA's Access to Justice Committee, and the Minnesota Justice Foundation for co-sponsoring this great event. And thank you to Kiri Sommermeyer, the Executive Director of the Corporate Institute, for her leadership in bringing this together. Let's thank Kiri. I know, so embarrassing. As many of you know, law schools, bar associations, and the profession really come together this week every year to celebrate pro bono, highlight the importance of pro bono, both as a professional responsibility and as an ethical responsibility of all lawyers. Here at the law school, we know that our students take this responsibility seriously. Each year, we've calculated our students contribute almost 100,000 hours of pro bono. That's through clinic, through field placements, through other volunteering, and that is fantastic. So thank you to all of you for all the work that you do already in pro bono. Today, we hope that you learn more about how the civil justice system functions in Minnesota, how it seeks to provide access to justice, who it serves, and how it helps vulnerable communities throughout the state, and how lawyers and soon-to-be lawyers can contribute. So welcome to our panelists today. We have Andrew Carlson, class of 1998. Andrew is a partner at Taft Law Firm here and the immediate past chair of Taft's Pro Bono Committee. And we have Anna Beadle, who many of you know, class of 2010. Anna is the executive director of the Minnesota Justice Foundation. And then we have two, I'd say more recent grads to talk about their experiences with pro bono. Yamaya Hanna, class of 2022. She's an attorney in Maslin's estate planning group. And Naveen Ranalingam, class of 2021. Naveen's an attorney in the IP and technology litigation group at Robbins. So thank you all for joining us today and for your insight on pro bono. And I'll turn this to Andy and Anna. Thanks all.
All right, good afternoon. Again, I'm Andy Carlson. Welcome to today's CLE. It's a pleasure to speak to you today. And again, thanks to Kiri and the U of M Law School, and also thanks to the MSBA Access to Justice Committee, which created the outline for this CLE. So we'll kind of jump into our roadmap. In Minnesota, we are fortunate to have a strong civil access to justice system. We've got legal aid organizations across the state and private attorneys doing pro bono work who all work closely together to help meet the legal needs of low-income Minnesotans. This presentation is a high-level overview of two key parts of Minnesota's system, legal aid and pro bono work. And so after I give this brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Anna, who's going to talk about an overview of Minnesota's civil legal aid system and how it is funded. Then I'll speak about pro bono, and then as you heard, we'll hear from Yamaya and Naveen. So the goal for today's CLE is to provide you with this basic overview. Minnesota's legal services system and pro bono system is very robust and is in a good place compared to lots of other states. Minnesota is really a leader in these areas. But the system is also kind of complicated, and today's CLE provides an opportunity to learn a bit about how it works and why it is needed. We know that millions of people in the US struggle daily with legal issues that impact their basic human needs. This includes situations ranging from eviction, foreclosure, problems with public benefits, discrimination, domestic violence, child custody, divorce. A large percentage of people in the US cannot afford a lawyer to help them with these kinds of problems. This problem is especially acute for low-income people. It has been estimated that low-income Americans don't get enough or any legal help for 92% of substantive civil legal issues of this type. We call this the justice gap, the difference between the needs, legal needs of low-income individuals and the resources available to meet those legal needs. The justice gap, if you think about it, kind of calls into question the fairness and the whole purpose of our justice system. because there are many case types and scenarios where having a lawyer makes all the difference. For example, there was a study done on immigration representation. Among immigrants released or never detained, 74% of the immigrants who had counsel had successful outcomes compared to only 13% of the unrepresented immigrants. Similarly, there's studies done in states like Massachusetts and California and Minnesota. They all come out with numbers like 90% of the cases for tenants who had representation resulted in positive outcomes, and a far lower percent for those who didn't have a lawyer. So let's define a couple important concepts here. What is civil legal aid? That's free legal help for low-income people by attorneys employed by nonprofit organizations. So these are attorneys whose full-time job is to assist low-income folks. These attorneys are very skilled and accomplished, and they dedicate their career to helping others. You're probably aware that there's public defenders that provide free legal services for low-income defendants in criminal cases. That's a great thing too. That's a different group of attorneys. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the civil side. And then what is pro bono? That's a Latin term that means for the public good, pro bono publico. Pro bono work refers to matters taken on by attorneys in private law firms on a volunteer, not paid basis to help people who could not otherwise afford their services. In Minnesota, pro bono work is defined and governed by Minnesota Rule of Professional Conduct 6.1. Under that definition, pro bono includes service to low-income people, service to certain kinds of nonprofits and the legal profession. The main thing we're talking about today is direct service by attorneys to low-income people. There's other parts of the system in addition to civil legal aid and pro bono. The court system plays a role, bar associations, many other organizations. But today we're going to focus on civil legal aid and pro bono. So now I'll turn things over to Anna to talk about legal aid in more detail.
Andy. So we will start by getting into why civil legal aid matters, what civil legal aid does, who is served, and how the funding works. Civil legal aid is essential for strong communities. What is the work of legal aid? It's about helping low-income people with their civil legal problems. Nationally, 3 in 4 low-income households experienced one or more civil legal problems in the previous year. Often these problems involve basic needs like safe housing, access to health care, and safety from abuse. Civil legal aid provides legal services to help clients achieve security and access to opportunities. And the slide lays out examples of common case types in the areas of family law, housing, and economic stability. Civil legal aid helps to address disparities based on race, gender, economic status, and other factors as well. We know that Minnesota has significant racial disparities related to education, employment, and income. People of color are more likely to live in poverty. So to go back to the national statistic of 3 in 4 low-income households experiencing one or more civil legal problems in the previous year, it follows that applying that to Minnesota, that there would be significant racial disparities when it comes to civil legal aid problems in Minnesota as well. And then on the flip side, if people aren't able to receive services from legal aid, then they may not have the access to the legal information, advice, or representation that they would need to help them resolve their legal problems. Now, when we talk about civil legal aid supporting basic human needs, it's important to understand the reality that even in a state with a legal aid system as good as Minnesota's, the reality is that many people are going to court without the help that they may need. And so I would like to look at the top lines here of this graph and highlight those as an example. So these are looking at the percentages for landlords and tenants who have representation in eviction matters. This data is from the Self-Represented Litigants Program at the state of Minnesota, and it's just showing the likelihood that in eviction matters, landlords are likely to have attorneys and tenants are not. The numbers are 61% of landlords having representation compared to 6% of tenants having representation. Excuse me, like 36. So that means that 39% of landlords and 94% of tenants would be unrepresented. And so tenants are better off being represented by an attorney versus representing themselves. And there's data to back that up, including local data. A study that was conducted by Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid and Volunteer Lawyers Network of housing court matters showed that represented clients in housing court for eviction proceedings were less likely to be evicted, received more time to move out, and were significantly less likely to end up in a shelter. We don't have time in this presentation to talk about consumer debt matters, but you can see that is also a noteworthy dynamic and power differential. And I'll just flag for you that if this is of interest, that you might like to check out the consumer debt litigation report that the MSBA's Access to Justice Committee worked on last year. That's available on the Minnesota Bar's website. So now with that said, let's look at the ecosystem of legal aid providers around the state of Minnesota. How are the services that legal aid programs provide delivered across the state? The answer is that we have this ecosystem of nonprofits around the state of Minnesota that make up our civil legal aid network. These programs provide direct legal representation and other services to low-income Minnesotans. This includes both staff legal teams providing services as well as the private attorneys who are providing pro bono through the private attorney involvement programs that these organizations host. 25% of the services that we talk about when we talk about civil legal aid are provided by the private bar on a pro bono basis, and Andy will talk more about that in the pro bono section. But as you can see from the map here on the left-hand side of the slide, there are 6 larger regional programs that together cover all counties in Minnesota. And then there are 19 listed targeted programs here as well that provide services to address various community needs. So one of the large organizations like Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid is a regional provider on a range of matters. There are other organizations that are smaller and focused on specific issues such as domestic violence like Tubman. And then there are statewide organizations that are focused on specific issues like the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, or programs like Legal Assistance of Dakota County that provide family law and housing and other services within a more specific geography. So they all come together to serve the legal needs of low-income Minnesotans. This is not an inclusive list, as there are a fully inclusive list, as there are other local, state, regional, and national programs that play a role in access to civil justice work. But with these 25 organizations, that represents about 250 legal aid attorneys in our state, as well as all of the members of those legal teams, the paralegals and intake staff and the like. But that 250 number for legal aid attorneys means that there's about 1 attorney for every 5,000 income eligible people in the state of Minnesota. And that statistic kind of lends itself to think about, well, how do we provide services as much as we can with the resources that we have? So there is this continuum of service, and if you look at the left side, at the left-hand side of the continuum, legal information is resources provided online at websites like Law Help MN, at law libraries, at courthouses and other community settings. Then moving to advice and brief service, that would refer to things like in-person legal clinics, brief advice clinics, remote brief advice clinics, hotline services, answering questions on Minnesota legal advice online, which I invite you to check out as a possible pro bono opportunity, and other limited scope services. Then moving to full representation, which could be by pro bono or legal aid attorneys in a variety of matters, like we've looked at in the previous slides, from housing to immigration to advising startup entrepreneurs in the community and working with nonprofits and small businesses, a whole range of legal services provided in that category. And then moving to the far side of the chart with policy work and impact litigation, which could include things like civil rights litigation and legislative and other advocacy. So some clients, may only need basic information and advice in order to take the next step that they need to do in order to resolve their legal matter. And others really would benefit, for example, from policy and systems change to address like the underlying situation. And then there are other people who really need full representation, but unfortunately the resources don't allow for that. So there are some challenging decisions that have to be made as programs weigh who can be served in what way in order to work within the resources that are available. And then, within civil law, there are many substantive areas, so which are focused on by legal aid. And you can see from this chart that the areas that have the highest percentages are 30% family law matters and then 29% housing matters. So this reflects the priority of helping to ensure safety and stability for clients. Family cases would include dissolutions, child custody, parenting time, and then protective orders as well, because domestic violence is a key issue, focus issue for legal aid programs. Then if we look at the demographics of who is served, just a quick note that there is some variation in client demographics when you're looking at different regions of the state and by legal issue, but to try to give an overview, starting on the left-hand side with the race demographic data, 53% of clients are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. This reflects the trends seen in many studies on legal needs, which are that BIPOC communities are more likely to have legal issues and more vulnerable to systematic injustices. In Minnesota, we also see income disparities at play. 30% of Native Americans and 25% of Black Minnesotans live in poverty versus only about 7% of the white population. Then moving to the middle chart, 67% of clients are women, and there are a couple of things to consider there. First is that women are statistically more likely to be victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and harassment, and these are priority areas for civil legal aid programs. And then secondly, women are more likely to live in poverty in Minnesota than men, and also more likely to have unpaid responsibilities in the family unit, where if they were to go through a separation, then they would potentially be more likely to be income eligible for legal aid. And then lastly, noting that 18% of clients are age 60 plus. We've seen in the past few years, since 2020, that the poverty rate for seniors in Minnesota is increasing at an alarming rate, from about 7% before the pandemic to about 9% after. And this is something that social services agencies are working closely on to address, but legal aid is a crucial part of the support system in our state for our elders. Then next we look at how do legal aid programs determine who they help, what factors impact who receives services. So the first step in the process for getting civil legal aid services is going through intake. Part of the intake process is to determine client eligibility. There's many criteria, and they really vary from program to program. So we looked at the other slide with over 25 programs. a lot of variation, but the staff and boards are trying to balance available services and what the community is saying the highest areas of needs are, as well as funding requirements. There will be some people who seek help from legal aid who may not be eligible. For example, if they have a lower income, but an income that is not low enough to meet the eligibility criteria. And in that case, there are resources available ranging from self-help services at the courthouses, modest means programs through the State Bar Association, to innovations in the legal profession, such as the Paraprofessional Pilot Project, which has now been made permanent and would allow for Minnesota legal paraprofessionals to represent and advise clients in select matters with oversight by a licensed Minnesota attorney. On the last slide, I'll just note that a final criteria at the bottom of this slide has to do with capacity, the capacity of programs to take on additional clients. So that is unfortunately one of the factors, and that goes back to, again, like the resource issues and the gap between the need and the capacity to serve everyone. So we can look at the turnaway rate as one way to think about this discrepancy between the resources available and the need. So as of the 2022 data, we can see here that legal aid turns away about 55% of eligible applicants. So that means that legal aid has the capacity to provide services to about 45% of eligible applicants. So that's less than half. And that really just gets to the heart of why during Pro Bono Week, we want to take the time to educate people across all parts of the bar to understand how the legal aid system works, the resource gaps that exist, and then how they can help as volunteer attorneys and as advocates for legal aid. So now that we've kind of touched on what the system is, we'll talk a little bit about how it's funded. As we explore when we were considering the turnaway rate, the funding is just insufficient to meet all of the needs there are for free legal services in civil matters. So, but in order to kind of put that in perspective, we want you to just have a short overview of what the funding sources are. So we have multiple sources of funding for our civil legal aid system, and I want to start by saying something about the largest percentage, which is the state appropriations. So that's 30% of the funding for our system. This is money that's allocated by the legislature for civil legal aid. We sometimes are asked how Minnesota compares to other states. Generally, Minnesota is a leader in state support for civil legal aid and allocates more money than most states. And in this past biennium, we had a major historic increase in the amount of funding that the legislature allocated. This helped programs to increase salaries, and that then led to better staff retention, which then increases program capacity, because when there's less staff turnover, then there's more continuity with caseloads and people are able to serve more clients. So that increase in funding was really important. There are some states that have very limited funding available and rely on funding from federal funds and other sources. You know, in some states, the federal funding could even be like 80% of the total amount. So we're very fortunate in Minnesota to have this investment from the legislature. Another slice of this pie chart that's of note is the one that's Legal Services Corporation at 10%, so that's the main federal funder for civil legal aid in the United States. The other government funding is at 22%, and that would include things like other state and federal funders, such as like the Office on Violence Against Women, as an example. And then I really wanted to just mention that IOLTA is the interest on lawyers' trust accounts. That those interest balances from accounts where we're holding client funds go toward civil legal aid. That revenue varies like very dramatically based on what the interest rates are. So in the last 5 years, IOLTA has gone from nearly $2 million in 2019 down to about 500,000 in 2021, and then now it's up over 3 million for 2023, but we'll be going back down again now as interest rates decrease again. The percentages like in this pie chart would vary like really from organization to organization about how their individual budgets are composed, so there's like a lot of variation there. But if we just consider all of this, this pie chart represents for those 25 organizations that we mentioned, that's $64 million for fiscal year 2023. So that's the salaries for the attorneys at Legal Aid, the other staff, and then all of the associated costs with the maintenance of the programs. So some takeaways that we hope that we wanted to note is, though there were major increases in the last biennium with the state funding, there's still a high turnaway rate and more resources are needed. And as Andy alluded to, unlike with public defense, the funding that we receive is not kind of underpinned by a right to counsel. So we have to keep advocating for the funding that we need, and the private bar's help with that advocacy is really significant. And support in general from the legal community is really important, and this includes, support from organizational donors such as law firms, support from bar associations, and the individual giving of people in the legal profession, and then the advocacy that we all can do on behalf of civil legal aid. Our ecosystem that we talked about in Minnesota has really strong and important connections to the private bar in Minnesota, which includes, the financial support you saw on that pie chart for those donations, as well as pro bono support in providing pro bono services to clients, and Andy will talk about that next.
So then switching over to the pro bono side, now that we've taken a tour of the civil legal aid ecosystem, as you've heard, pro bono is a really important part of the story of increasing access to justice. Lawyers have a responsibility to provide pro bono service, and they're needed because there's a need. Minnesota has a really long history and legacy of strong pro bono work. Let's talk about how it's defined and what it means. So Rule 6.1 of the Professional Conduct Rules states every lawyer has a professional responsibility to provide legal services to those unable to pay. Every lawyer, that's a pretty broad rule. It continues, a lawyer should aspire to render at least 50 hours of pro bono public service per year. So it's a rule of the professional conduct. It's the thing that governs lawyers' conduct. Rule 6.1 goes on to define pro bono. First, it says that a lawyer should provide a substantial majority of that 50 hours to persons of limited means, charitable or community organizations in matters that are designed to address the needs of persons of limited means, so targeted organizations to help low-income people, like the legal aid programs. The common denominator, the essence of pro bono, is providing service to individual people who otherwise could not afford it. Rule 6.1 also contemplates some other types of pro bono service, providing services to organizations that protect civil rights or civil liberties, public rights, providing services to nonprofits in general, where the payment of standard legal fees would significantly deplete the organization's resources. There's lots of nonprofits that are pretty big and have plenty of money to pay private attorneys. Just being a nonprofit doesn't mean the work for that organization should be pro bono, but if it would further their purposes and this payment of standard legal fees would deplete the organization's resources, then it could be pro bono work. And participation in activities for improving the law, legal system, legal profession. So we've touched on this a little bit already, but why is pro bono necessary? There's a nice statement here from the ABA Standing Committee on Pro Bono and Public Service about conferring the privilege to practice law. I'll kind of provide a spectrum of reasons, and I think some reasons will appeal to different people. Why pro bono is really important, and why, as a lawyer, which you're all planning to be, I think, soon, you can fit it into your practice. So some people, it's just about being motivated to help the less fortunate. A lot of attorneys will tell you that the most satisfying and meaningful work they ever did was on a pro bono case. Some attorneys are really motivated by trying to develop experience and advance their career. A lot of the time for associates at law firms, pro bono is a great way to gain experience in ways that might not otherwise be available. You can look at it sort of from a more economic point of view, which this slide kind of connects to. You know, lawyers have a monopoly on practicing law. No one else can do it. No one's allowed to do it. It would be unjust to only provide legal services to those who can afford it. When we have other businesses that are monopolies, like a utility, service has to be provided by those monopolies to everyone. Same principle should apply for lawyering. Here are some other considerations. The legal system was created and maintained, and is maintained, by attorneys and for attorneys, in a sense, which makes it really difficult to navigate without an attorney. So that's kind of a reason why there's a need. The legal system has a history of being used for discrimination and bias against populations. Some people may be motivated to try to be part of changing that system. As we've talked about, the legal aid system is not fully funded, and so there's lots of vulnerable people who need help. Lawyers' fees are very high. The cost of help is far higher than most day-to-day Minnesotans can afford for problems in their lives. And as you saw in the earlier slides, there are cases with really extreme power dynamics. Landlord-tenant, creditor-debtor, domestic violence can sometimes be this way. When you have litigation that is between two parties with an extremely disparate power dynamic, it can weaken trust and the effectiveness of the judicial system. So that puts all justice at risk. So Minnesota has created, through its leadership in the judicial branch and the legislature and the bar associations, a strong set of rules that support and guide pro bono in our state. So Minnesota CLE Rule 6, I think it's actually 6D, not 6C as it says on the slide, provides that attorneys can get 1 hour of CLE credit for every 6 hours of pro bono that they do. Now, the pro bono has to be through an approved legal services provider. In other words, the legal aid programs that we just heard about. There's also a corporate counsel pro bono rule that allows attorneys with the corporate counsel type of license to volunteer. That's a really big growth area right now for pro bono. There's also a rule about uniform pro bono reporting. So as you law students will find out, in order to maintain your law license, you have to annually register with the state. The form requires you to report for the preceding calendar year the approximate number of hours of pro bono service that you provided as defined in Rule 6.1, and whether you have made any financial contributions to organizations that provide legal services to persons of limited means. Have you given some money? Attorneys who are employed by the government and judges are exempt from that, but can voluntarily report. So that rule, you can see how it might remind people of their pro bono obligations. There's also an interesting rule in Rule 6.5 relating to conflicts. As you probably know, if a lawyer has a conflict on a matter, the conflict is imputed to the firm. That doesn't apply in certain pro bono contexts. If you are working, doing a pro bono short-term limited legal services, like in a brief advice clinic, there's only a conflict if you actually know about the conflict. It's not, you don't have to figure out conflicts across the whole firm. And that makes it easier for people to volunteer for walk-in clinics. If a person walked in and said, I have a problem with XYZ company, well, I don't know if Taft has worked with that company at some point or if we have a conflict, but luckily I don't have to know. That's the point of this rule. Otherwise it'd be like impossible for me to help that client because I have to do a conflicts check, and then that would take a while, and then by then the client's moved on. So there's a lot of interesting rules and thoughtful framework for pro bono service here. There's also lots of ways to do pro bono, sort of similar to the spectrum that Anna showed. There's a continuum here. There's brief service, providing advice over the phone, through Minnesota Legal Advice Online, remote or in-person brief advice clinics. There's full representation, working on a case from start to finish. There's policy work. Some cases, even full rep cases, only take a short amount of time. Some cases take years and years. I've had a couple cases from the Children's Law Center that took several years as the kid moved through that whole foster care system. The bottom line is that there's very many opportunities in very many areas of law, very many different programs. There's all sorts of resources like training, sample documents, mentoring, co-counseling that are available to help volunteer attorneys do pro bono work. And you know, as you're thinking about doing pro bono work, you're going to want to think about how it fits in with what you're there to do. You know, there are different angles that you might want to think about it. Are there scheduling issues? Some pro bono things are asynchronous. You can do it at your own schedule. Some you have to be there with the client. There's clinics on evenings and weekends. There's doing things remotely. There's thinking about what is your passion, what kind of development or professional development you're trying to create for yourself, rules that your employer or your law firm might have, how much help you want. There's all sorts of things that you want to think about as you think about what kind of pro bono work to do. And as I said, there's all sorts of resources out there. In addition to the ones I said before, the state law libraries have resources. There is assistance from law students through MJF. There is the training that the programs provide. There are topical CLEs. And many legal service providers provide malpractice insurance that covers volunteers on their pro bono cases. So there's a whole infrastructure there to help people find the right fit for pro bono. And here, we have some examples of some opportunities just within one of the programs, Volunteer Lawyers Network. We talked about 25 programs. This is just one. But these are the kinds of things that Volunteer Lawyers Network is looking for attorneys to help in a pro bono way on. Family court, housing court, a real estate clinic, various different landlord-tenant things, letters to creditors, immigration work. Criminal record expungement is a very active area for pro bono right now. Many firms have a staff person. My firm has a staff person, a pro bono counsel, whose job is to help our attorneys get involved in pro bono. We can talk about some trends and what's happening with pro bono. This slide shows the total amount of pro bono work done in Minnesota, kind of falling as we got into the pandemic, and the pandemic definitely had a dramatic effect. In part, that was because many clinics and programs were suspended or went virtual. Also, seems like the pandemic just caused a lot of people to sort of disengage from various activity, which I guess included pro bono work. At the same time, the need increased in a lot of ways during the pandemic. One really important component in Minnesota, I think we're pretty much over this now, but is very important to note, is that during the pandemic in Minnesota, there was a moratorium on evictions for quite a while, many months. And so then when that moratorium was lifted, there were months and months and months of eviction cases backed up in this giant glut in court. And it took a lot of volunteers and a lot of legal aid staffers a long time, in the courts, a long time to work through that backlog. The increase we see in 2023 at the right end of the graph, I think reflects the transition back to offering in-person clinics. It's good that we're kind of on an upward curve right now, but obviously there's still a lot of work to do. Law students have the opportunity to get involved through Minnesota Justice Foundation. And there's all sorts of other, as I've talked about, a whole bunch of other activities that people can think about. I'm going to conclude my section with a couple suggestions about things that folks can do now. And they're listed on this slide. You know, commit to do some pro bono work, help foster pro bono and access to justice in your law school or the other places where you are, support legal aid organizations with money, legislative advocacy perhaps. And I just want to close by emphasizing for law students, as you're looking forward to being a lawyer, that pro bono work can be a really important part of the path to professional development. A lot of attorneys' very first deposition or their first appellate argument was in a pro bono case. I personally have had pro bono matters where that pro bono matter allowed me to learn about a new practice area or a new niche in the law that had sort of some overlap with my practice. And then later a paying client called and said, "You ever done one of those? Do you know how to do this?" And I was able to say, "Yup, I have done that," because of a pro bono matter. So I think that's a really important thing for law students to keep in mind as they're looking ahead to their legal career. So that concludes our part of the presentation. Now we'll turn things over to Yamaya and Naveen. And why don't you guys come on up here? We'll trade spots here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I would like to introduce myself first and then hand it over to Emiya. My name is Naveen. I'm an attorney at Robbins Kaplan, and I graduated from the law school in 2021. And while at law school, I was part of the Consumer Protection Clinic that I really liked a lot, and that was my first window into what it means to practice law.
Yeah, so I'm Yamaya Hannah. I graduated in 2022, so I'm going on being a third-year associate at a private law firm here in Minneapolis. I was also in I was in the immigration clinic when I was in law school, and that was one of my first opportunities to get to work with an immigration client, and that's something I'll talk a little bit about when we get started. But yeah, I'm really excited to kind of share about what it actually looks like in practice to work on pro bono cases and the importance of it. So I can let Naveen get started.
Yeah, I would like to begin by requesting all of you, especially law students, to think about pro bono in the perspective of like twin facets. What I mean by that is one as a professional obligation, another one as a personal benefit. This may seem like a dichotomy with different competing perspectives and tensions, but I have come to realize that it's just two sides of the same coin. What I mean by that is we speak the language of law that runs the country and the world. Andy mentioned this, we have a monopoly on practicing law. I've come to realize that we are merely but interpreters, translators of the language of law into common tongues like English, Spanish, Tamil, Bengali, whatever. So that is the professional obligation side. On the personal benefit side, when I do pro bono work, I become a better attorney. That is our principal goal. All of us here practicing attorneys, it's to be a better lawyer every single day, to become a better writer, to become a better legal advocate, to become a better oral advocate. Not for nothing, it's called the practice of law. This is just like any other skill. You get better by doing it. And pro bono provides those opportunities. So before sharing stories, that's my philosophy, if you will, to think about pro bono from this perspective, and continue to contribute to the community even while you're in law school. Andy mentioned this. Minnesota has a really cool provision where as long as you are supervised by a practicing attorney, even when you're in the second year of law school, you get to practice law. That is an awesome power and responsibilities. You can represent real clients in real cases. That common folks who are not part of this profession cannot do.
Yeah, I'll add too, I think as law students, and I remember facing this when I was 1L, people start talking about you have to decide if you want to be a public interest attorney or if you want to go work in private practice. And that can be kind of hard for people who came to law school to help people, but then kind of see that realistically, working at a larger firm, you get different opportunities, you get to work with different types of clients, and you feel like you have to leave behind that desire to help people that might need it more than the clients that you work with in a law firm. And so a lot of what students say is I end up going to a larger law firm and then do my pro bono work on the side and get the chance to still feel like I'm contributing to the community in that way. And now being out 2 years, I definitely see that playing out every day. It's not just makes you feel better taking that high-paying law job, but it is something you really actually get to make part of your career, and you have to seek it out. As a summer associate, I was able to ask, like, is there anything I can do as I'm a law student here, to help pro bono projects at the firm, and I was able to help out on a pro bono matter even as a summer associate at my firm. So it's something that you do have to make a little bit of an extra effort as you're in private practice to get those opportunities, but as they said as well, a lot of firms now are having pro bono dedicated like counsel at those firms where you can work with them to find out like what are the types of matters you really do want to work on and how can we get those brought into the firm so that you can work on a pro bono basis with those clients. So I think don't think of it as two different paths. You can really kind of weave those in a really meaningful way.
Yeah, I would like to talk about a couple experiences. And before that, I want to thank Anna and Kiri for this opportunity for the law school, and also for doing excellent work in the community. MJF and Carpet Institute are integral parts of the community, and they do great work on our behalf and Minnesotans at large. I am at a exclusively litigation firm. We do trial work. I'm in the IP group, but as a junior attorney, and especially in the IP group, I don't get a lot of chances to go to trial. Even when I do, I'm not going to be the one who is direct examining a witness, cross-examining a witness, giving opening statement or closing statements. But pro bono work has allowed me to refine those skills. For example, one of the organizations that I closely work with is called Tubman. They represent victims of domestic violence in getting something called order for protection. More often than not, it's mostly from their romantic partners. Those are cases where if there is a trial, you, as someone representing a victim, you get to do direct examination or cross-examination. And it could be like a 30-minute, 45-minute cross-examination. You get to work with the client very closely, and you represent those clients in front of a judge, give opening statements and closing statements. And those are opportunities to refine your skill as a trial lawyer. There is also an organization that does amazing work, and there is a huge need for that. So if you are thinking of doing trial work and becoming a litigation attorney, and you are at a big firm, but may not have a chance to be in the courtroom every day, if you are in a public defender's office or a county attorney's office, but still want to sharpen those skills and be able to think quickly on your feet and have these skills, pro bono is an amazing way to do good for people who need representation, to help an organization that you're passionate about, but at the same time, make sure it also personally benefits you from a professional perspective of continuing to be a better attorney.
And I'll add too, if you are hearing that and you're like, I don't want to be a litigator, I don't want to be near a courtroom, kind of like how I felt, there are a lot of opportunities to get to do pro bono work that isn't necessarily getting that, in-court experience. And so some of the things that I've worked on are helping people with immigration, asylum cases, and that generally doesn't involve having to get up in front of a judge. And then other things that I've done are like one-day clinics, helping people put together their estate plans, like getting their wills and their healthcare directives in place. And that doesn't involve any sort of courtroom experience. And then I also have helped people, low-income people who are facing different estate issues, like needing to clear up the title to their home or navigating liens on their properties. And that also doesn't involve working with a judge. So I've found helping people navigate complicated paperwork is also a really important service that we can offer, and is something that I think a lot of people get intimidated by. They're like, there's all these statutes, there's all this red tape, these hoops I need to jump through, and being able to kind of take a look at it using our lawyer training is really something that's valuable to clients.
I also want to touch upon, the transactional side of things. As someone who practices litigation, I also want to ensure that, sometimes my, business associations or corporations class knowledge is not wasted, but, I'm keeping in touch with those. I help an organization called Springboard for the Arts. They are a art collective in Minnesota that represent up-and-coming artists on all kinds of IP-related matters, licenses, trademarks, copyrights, and representing them against, maybe a bigger record company or someone who is well represented on the other side. You help them create work, but then also get the value for their labor for that creative work. And I like helping creatives. There's also maybe, a potential book of business developing angle to it in the future. But, all of us have a responsibility that, the next DESA or the next engravy, comes up from Minnesota. And then we do that by helping budding artists who may not be able to afford, say, a top entertainment lawyer's hourly fee at Taft or something. And that also helps you, in all other facets, like there's always going to be a contract issue at any kind of work that you do, trust and estates or something else, litigation, maybe licenses is the crux of the dispute. So there are creative ways to engage with the community from a pro bono perspective. At the same time, that helps you be involved in area of law that you are interested in, that you are passionate about, and continue to become a better attorney and better lawyer.
Yeah, and as you're kind of thinking about the practice areas you'd maybe want to weave into your career as your pro bono work, thinking about what you're doing in law school now, like if you're in a clinic and you're thinking that that's not going to be your main type of work, you're getting valuable experience and learning how to work with different types of clients. And so for me, I knew that I really, really was passionate about immigration law and helping people with the asylum process and getting to be in the clinic for 2 years, gaining that experience. So when a pro bono asylum case came into the firm and they were looking for someone to help, I was like, I know exactly how to do that. I did that for 2 years. And so it's a great way to use what you're learning, and then you can bring that in through your career and start helping clients who wouldn't be able to afford your services at the firm that you're working at, but are, get connected with you from the Advocates for Human Rights. Really relies on private attorneys to help keep those cases moving. And so thinking about the clinics you're doing, the field experience you're getting as a law student, and then giving credit to yourself that you have gained that experience and can use that to help people, even if it's not your main practice area.
Yeah, my final example of pro bono work is so something that I'm really passionate about is transgender rights. There's an organization called Outlaw Minnesota that our organization collaborates with, and through Robbins Kaplan, I got to know about this organization, and our organization facilitates something called LGBTQ Outlaw Clinic, essentially what they do is we help folks with the name change process and the gender marker change process with the state of Minnesota. Obviously, we are licensed to practice here, and it's for Minnesotans, but that could be someone who recently moved to Minnesota from other state. They may have a birth record from other state. And this is also both adults and minors. And that is really important work because, in this kind of political climate where transgender rights are under attack, there's an orchestrated attack going on against transgender individuals, both children, adults, and it affects healthcare, fundamental right. And there is a real need for attorneys to help transgender folks navigate the system. And the very first step is getting affirmed by the state for who they are, what they are. And I'm really proud of being part of this. I joined this project relatively recently in the last year and a half. it's been a pretty steep learning curve. But, I just wanted to also touch upon something that Emma mentioned. If you didn't know to speak the language of the law, put yourself in the shoes of someone who's not familiar with navigating with the institution of the judiciary. Minnesota, by all means, is a really great state for free public resources. If you go to the website, download, read those forms, you can probably do it by yourself. But not everyone can do that. And it can be overwhelming. And this is completely not even counting for the fact that there's a lot of emotional stuff going into it. And if you can be there for those folks navigating this process, that would make a huge difference in their lives. And also you become a better attorney in terms of client communications, your communications with your colleagues or business professionals, and just dealing with the government as an institution.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll want to add too is just like in practice what it looks like to work on these cases. So for some of them, the ones that I get through the advocates doing immigration cases, they stay involved the entire time, and we're able to go to them and say, well, I'm not sure what the government usually looks for on these forms. Can you give us some tips? And they're really responsive and are able to get back to us about how to properly fill out the different documents and things we might want to keep in mind. And then the same thing goes for, I've worked on a probate estate with the Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, and one of the attorneys there, she's been awesome with working with me. We've been bouncing ideas off of each other. We've been dividing up the work. Like, she's been tracking down the interested parties. I've been over here drafting the petition, and it's been a really great experience to get to work with attorneys that are outside of your organization. You get to develop those connections, and and then I also get to tap on the partners at my firm who know that area, and they can help me, make sure I'm covering all the bases. And so it's a great way to collaborate with people that you wouldn't otherwise work with, and you definitely have the support and resources of those organizations behind you, so you don't have to worry about messing anything up. So yeah. We're at time.
Yeah, I was just going to say, open invitation to reach out to us if you have any
Absolutely.
questions navigating law school, post-law school plans. Yeah, thank you so much for being here and for the opportunity again.
Yeah,
So I want to
absolutely.
thank you, Yamea, thank you, Naveen, Andy, Anna, everyone. We are right at time, and so I think I'm going to suggest that we can all stick around or head to the business law clinic if people have questions, if we go beyond the next 10 minutes here. But thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for attending. Happy Pro Bono Week, and we really appreciate it.